Hey everybody, welcome to Pathway Online. We're so glad you joined us today. Today we're going to continue in Acts and we're going to talk about stories, about a storyteller and about something else that has to do with you. So hang on and watch, but first let's stand up and let's worship.
Shout your praise and walk away and forget your name. I stand for you if that's all I do, 'cause there is none that compares to you. 'Cause all I want in this lifetime is you, and all I want in this whole world is you, you, you. Tell the world that Jesus lives. Tell the world that, tell the world that, tell the world that he died for them. Tell the world that he lives again. No longer I, but Christ in me. It's the truth that set me free. How could this world be a better place? But by thy mercy, by thy grace. 'Cause all I want in this lifetime is you, and all I want in this whole world is you, you, you. Everybody now! Tell the world that Jesus lives. Tell the world that, tell the world that, tell the world that he died for them. Tell the world that he lives again. Tell the world that Jesus lives. Tell the world that, tell the world that, tell the world that he died for them. Tell the world that he lives again. From the front to the back, let's go, come on! Come on, come on, we'll tell the world about you. 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 Tell the world that Jesus lives. Tell the world that, tell the world that, tell the world that he died for them. Tell the world that he lives again. Tell the world that Jesus lives. Tell the world that, tell the world that, tell the world that he died for them. Tell the world that he lives again. Come on, we'll tell the world about you. 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 About you.
Hey, I've got a great story to tell you. You see, when I was younger, like, 10, 11, there I was in my neighborhood with all my buddies. And we lived on this hill. And on the back of the hill, there was a cliff off of this house, or actually this property that didn't have a house on it. So we would always like to go sneak up there and kind of poke around and see what it was. And we found this cliff. And being boys, we thought, wow, what a cool cliff. Why don't we climb down it? But when we looked, we couldn't climb down it. We needed a rope. So we go back to my house, but we didn't find a rope. What we found was this really, really long, thick cable, like that thick, used to tow cars and trucks, and it's got these hooks on it. So next thing you know, me and my neighbors, we're grabbing this tow cable and we're going up the hill with this tow cable, wrapped it around a tree, threw it down, and I'm going to stop there because I want to tell you more about stories than about a story. You see, one of the things we want to talk about today is we like to have stories. We like to tell stories. We like to hear stories. That's why we like to read. That's why we like to watch TV. And that's why we like to watch movies. And I don't know about you, but I've always liked to tell stories. So even when I was younger, I would take clay and I'd put it all together and I would video stop motion stormtroopers and everything else I could think of to make that. I loved telling stories, no matter what it looked like. So guess what? Today, we're going to talk about stories. But more importantly, we're going to talk about one of our storytellers. We're going to continue in Acts and we're going to learn about a storyteller that you're probably already familiar with. But then after that, we want to talk about your story. And you're going to see what we mean as we continue on. Oh, and back to that story I was telling you where we're about to go down the cliff. Hang on to the end and I'll tell you the rest of the story.
Exploring Acts.
We've been exploring the book of Acts, which was written by a man named Luke as a continuation of the Gospel of Luke. Acts began with Jesus telling his followers to spread the good news about his kingdom.
And they would start in Jerusalem, then go out into the neighboring regions, and from there to the ends of the earth.
Now, in Jerusalem, their message was received by many and opposed by many, especially by the leaders of the temple. They were scandalized by this new claim that the whole story of Israel had been fulfilled by Jesus' life, death, and resurrection.
One of these leaders was a man named Saul of Tarsus, who worked tirelessly to stop the movement. That is, until he met the risen Jesus himself. And this encounter transformed Saul from an enemy of Jesus into a herald of his kingdom.
And so for years, he traveled about the Roman Empire using his Roman name, Paul, starting Jesus communities all over.
And one of Paul's greatest desires was that all of these diverse communities would see themselves as one unified people, regardless of their differences, Jew or non-Jew, male or female, slave or free.
Jesus was creating one unified family of equals living together under his rule.
And this brings us to the final section of Acts. Back in Jerusalem, where the movement began, the Jewish followers of Jesus were suffering from a drought and food shortage.
And Paul was so passionate about the church's unity that he began a major fundraising project among the diverse churches he had started. They would pool their money together so he and a group of representatives could take it as a relief gift to Jerusalem.
But it's not safe for Paul in Jerusalem. The Jewish leaders there dislike him so much, they want him dead.
And Paul knew he was walking into a trap. His friends all begged him not to go, but no one could stop him.
Yet why would Paul risk his life to bring this gift? Couldn't he have sent someone else?
Well, for Paul, this was personal. Jerusalem was where he used to participate in the murder of Jesus' followers, and now he gets to serve them. It's also where Jesus himself was executed, and so for Paul, it would be an honor to suffer there alongside his king.
Paul goes to Jerusalem, and as expected, he's found by his enemies. A mob forms, and they try to kill him. But Roman soldiers save his life by taking him into custody.
The Jewish leaders are accusing Paul of starting a revolt against Rome, but they can't prove it.
And the Romans don't know what to do with him.
Yeah, they can see Paul's not a criminal, but his claim that a crucified Jewish man is the risen king of the world, it keeps getting him into trouble.
And so Paul gets transferred from one court to another until he demands that his case be tried before the court of Caesar in Rome. And so they happily ship him off.
Now, throughout this section of Acts, Luke, the writer of the story, has portrayed Paul's trials and imprisonments so that they resemble his previous stories of Jesus' trials and imprisonment. Luke's making an important point. When the people of Jesus follow the way of Jesus, their stories will begin to look like his story, which is beautiful, but it also comes with a cost.
On the way to Rome, the boat carrying Paul is hit by a violent storm, and everyone freaks out.
Except for Paul. He's below deck hosting a meal, just like Jesus did the night before his trial. Paul blesses and then breaks the bread, promising that God is with them through this storm. And the next day, the ship hits and then breaks apart on the rocks, but everyone's washed safely ashore.
Which is amazing, but Paul's not out of trouble. He's taken to Rome and put under house arrest.
But it's not so bad. In his house, he can host groups of Jews and non-Jews, sharing with them the good news about Jesus, the risen king.
This is a bold move in Rome, the center of power where Caesar rules the world as king.
Yes, you have Jesus' alternative upside-down kingdom, now growing in the very heart of the world's most powerful empire, all through the suffering of a prisoner. And with this contrast between kingdoms, Luke ends his story.
That's a great image, but the story's supposed to be about this message spreading to the ends of the earth. So shouldn't it continue?
Of course, Luke has left the story open-ended on purpose, so that his readers would know that the story isn't over, and that they can participate in Jesus' kingdom that is still spreading to this day.
What an amazing story. The life of Paul. It's not all we've learned about in Acts, but the last good bit of Acts, we've talked about Paul over and over again. And what's really neat to me is when you stop and you think about Paul, like he started off in Jerusalem, being the one who was persecuting the believers of the way, this new crazy belief, right? And he even stood there and he gave approval when Stephen was stoned. He was like, yeah, this is what we need to do. He went looking for Christians to gather them up and throw them in jail. Now, all these years later, here we see Paul going back to Jerusalem, and he is the one being persecuted because he is now a believer of that crazy group, the Way. He is a follower of Jesus. What a cool story that is. You know, one thing I really liked about in the video was when it said that when the people of Jesus follow the ways of Jesus, then their stories begin to look a lot like Jesus' story, which is beautiful, but it comes with a cost. And I think we can see that when we look at the story in the life of Paul. We can see how his beliefs in Jesus, and he was so passionate about it, and how he was persecuted for his beliefs, and people didn't like him. When he came into Jerusalem, like people were upset, and they even wanted to kill him. We've learned so much about Paul, and I have to stop and think, what's your favorite part about it? What have you enjoyed learning the most as we've talked about Paul so much in these past few weeks? So what I want you to do is take a moment, hit the pause button, and stop and just talk about that with your family. What is your favorite part of Paul's story? About you guys, but I love to read. I love to read a good story. One of my favorite parts is coming to the end of the story when you can see how everything finishes, how it all comes together. How does everything turn out? You know, when you read the book of Acts, we don't really have an ending like that. It kind of seems like it just ends. And it made me think. And again, they said it in our video, and I really liked how they pointed this out, that the book of Acts doesn't have, I guess, a clear ending, because the story's not over. Remember back in Acts chapter 1 when Jesus told the disciples they would be his witnesses? It didn't end at the end of the book of Acts. That story, those people being witnesses, is still happening today. And we're a part of that now. We are now helping spread the message. We're a part of the story. How cool is that? The story hasn't ended. It's still going on.
When you think about Paul, what was his story? The story that he always told was how he was someone who persecuted Christians, who then met Jesus, and his life was changed, and then he began to tell people about Jesus. That's the essence, the whole of Paul's story. So the question is, I like stories. You probably like stories. We like to hear stories about people. We like people to hear our stories. But have you ever thought about telling people your story that means your story about you and Jesus? If nothing else out of the book of Acts, what we have learned is that it's important for us to continue what Paul did and tell our story. So the question for you is, what is your story? How did Jesus change your life? How are you different now that Jesus has become the leader in your life and the forgiver of your sins? So here's what we want to do. We have a little exercise for you, or a little thing to do. And we're going to put up some slides and everything for you, but what we want you to do is take a few minutes and write down your story. Now you can do this with a parent if you need to, or however you want to do it. You can type it up on a computer, write it on an iPad, or just draw it on a piece of paper. But we want you to take a little bit of time and write down your story. What difference has Jesus made in your life? And how can you tell other people about him using your story? So let's take a minute, pause, and take a little time and write down your story. Hey everybody, we're so glad you joined us for Pathway today and all the things we've talked about stories and your story. And we want you to know that we love you. We're so excited that we had all this time together talking about Paul and talking about the book of Acts. And pretty soon we're going to be getting out of Acts here in a couple of weeks, and we're going to be going through a whole new story about someone completely different. Speaking of stories, I forgot to finish mine, didn't I? All right, so there I was with my friends. We had wrapped that cable around a tree, and we began to rappel down the cliff, holding onto this really rusty, nasty cable. We get down to the bottom of the cliff, and we're so excited we made it. Nobody got hurt. Everything was great. And then we realized that at the bottom of the cliff is a whole bunch of this red mud. You know what I'm talking about, that Alabama red mud that's so nasty and disgusting. So now we had a problem. Were we supposed to go down that cliff? Probably not. And now we're covered in red mud from climbing down, and we got rust all over us, and I tended to come home like that most days anyway, but I really didn't want to get in trouble, so we had to come up with a reason why we were down there. That's a story for another day, because I can guarantee you it's not a great story in the end. So glad you joined us. We love you. We're praying for you. Can't wait to talk to you soon. Have a great week.